Welcome back to Unity Concepts with Useful Programming Tutorials. Today we're going to write some code to move a character around in 2D. To start with, we're going to add a simple sprite to our scene. We will then set the sprite to this knob sprite here. Next we're going to create a script in here called player movement. So we're going to delete this and add some references in. We're going to need a rigid body 2D, a public rigid body 2D called RB, and a public collider 2D called ground check. We'll also add a speed variable so we can control the speed of our character through the inspector. We also need to use fixed update instead of update. We'll now get the input from the axes we want to move along. First we will get the horizontal input from the player, so we'll store this in the moveX variable, as this will be the input on the x-axis. If we were making a top-down game, we would add this line to store the Y input as well. However, you can't jump in a top-down game, so for this tutorial we'll just be making a platformer style. So to store the movement, we will have a vector2. And this just allows us to apply this movement inside the rigid body because it does not accept single float values. We have to put it in a vector2 or a vector3 format. And this will be times the speed as well. On the Y value of the vector2 we will have 0 because we don't want to apply any Y. Now we'll use rb.addForce, and in here we will just put movement, and the force mode will be set to, if it will autocomplete, that will be set to for impulse. So first we're going to change the speed to 5, and then we will add a rigid body 2D. So we can just drag this from here into there. And we could also just drag the rigid body 2D into here from the inspector window. So we will also set gravity scale to 0 just because we don't want our object to fall down. Now if we press play, and in the top right you can see when I press the A and D keys, the sprite will move. However, at the moment I can just accelerate to infinity, which is not particularly good. So I can add some drag here on the linear drag, maybe 10. And we can now see that has probably a more sensible value, but we can probably have this higher, maybe 100. And there we go. We can see that it's not increasing or decreasing too fast. Time to set up jumping. First of all, we need a platform with a collider. We can add this the same way as our player sprite by just having a 2D object and sprite, and then we can use a squarish one. And if we just increase the scale of this on the X so it's a bit wider. And then we also add a rigid body 2D and a box collider 2D. We now have a platform. And first of all, we should probably also turn the gravity scale to 0 so the platform does not fall down. We also need to add a new object to our new sprite. and we'll just call this ground check. So on ground check, you can see that there is this white dot. That is our ground check object, and a new sprite you can see is the large white sprite. So we mess around with the Y on this by decreasing it until it becomes the bottom of the sprite. There we go, that seems about right. We want this to be the bottom so that we can check if the sprite is touching the ground or not. We can then add another box collider, and if we edit this collider, and if we zoom out a little, we can see this collider is far too big. So we'll make this very small on the y-axis because it should basically be a line. That should probably do. And then if we make this a bit smaller until it roughly fits where the sprite's bottom should be. You can see this green rectangle here, that is just a collider, and that is probably the ground. We'll also just move this above the platform so it doesn't fall down. Now we can go back into our script, and we will add a new variable called jump speed. Jump speed will be set in the inspector, and it will control how fast the player will jump. So we have to check if the jump key is pressed before we jump, and also we have to check if the player is on the ground before applying any force. So we will add a if statement here at the bottom of fixed update, and that will be if input dot get axes or get button. Get button is for single buttons, and axes will be for horizontal, so that can be multiple buttons, so left and right, positive or a negative, but button will just be one button. And this will just be positive or 1 when the button is pressed. So if we just have jump. For Unity, the default for this is spacebar, and we're not going to change this for this tutorial. Now we're going to add a script to our ground check object called check floor. And what this will do is it will check if the player is touching the floor, and it will set a boolean value to true or false depending on if they are or not touching the floor. In this check floor script, we're going to have 2 functions and 1 boolean. So this boolean will be a public bool, and it will be grounded, and this will be true whenever the character is on the ground, and it will be false whenever the character is not on the ground. So we're going to have on collision enter and on collision exit, and these both need to be 2D. So now in here, this should check that when we enter a collision, so this is just when 2 colliders collide, it should check if that is the floor. So if collision dot game object dot layer equals 8, and that, because 8 will be our layer for floor in our game, and we'll do the same here as well, and this will just make sure that this code only activates when the layer is 8, so when the character is on some floor. So in this one we're going to have grounded equals true, and in this one we're going to have grounded equals false. Another thing we have to do is change these collision 2Ds to they were collisions, not collision 2Ds. So they both have to be 2D, otherwise it will not work. So now we're ready to test our game, and we will make sure that the drag is not too high, because that would be not very good. And it will just fall very slowly. So if I just set this to 10 and I turn the mass up so we don't slide off to like infinity and beyond, and press play. And you can see I don't slide too far, and I can jump, not very fast. And if I turn up the jump speed from 5 to maybe 10, a bit higher, yeah, but still not high enough. And as you can also see, we can't, like I'm holding space, we can't double jump or anything like that. If I turn this to 100, off we go. And there we go. That will be this tutorial. So we've learned about how to make a simple 2D movement system and how to make a 2D jump system. In the next episode, we will be learning about how to make a 3D version of this, and that will be out in 1 week's time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.